Iron Bastion stood like a steel titan against the storm. Built into the mountainous terrain of Vorten 6, it was humanity's last foothold in the sector. A fortress of reinforced adamantite walls, kinetic shielding, and enough firepower to turn armies to dust. It had held against pirates, warlords, and rogue AI uprisings. But today, it faced something far worse. Commander Elias Vero stood at the main watchtower, his scarred hands gripping the cold railing as he gazed across the dead horizon. The sky, once clear, now churned with writhing shadows. He could see them, Zeltheris bioships descending from orbit like monstrous jellyfish, their vast organic hulls undulating, spewing spore clouds thick enough to blot out the twin suns. The creatures had been consuming system after system, leaving nothing but silence in their wake. Now they had come for humanity's last stand. Behind him, the fortress buzzed with frantic energy. Engineers patched up battle-worn defenses. Artillery crews ran final diagnostics on railgun turrets. Infantry squads loaded high-caliber rounds into their rifles, their faces grim but determined. The Bastion's AI, RGOS, flickered to life on a nearby holoscreen, its synthetic voice calm but urgent. Commander Vero, enemy fleet composition analyzed. Estimated ground deployment, 100,000 biological combat units. Hostile fleet strength, 78 bioships, 5 Dreadnought-class Leviathans. Estimated time to full planetary siege, 2 hours, 36 minutes. Vero exhaled slowly. And our odds? A slight pause. Based on current projections, a 3.4% chance of survival. Vero allowed himself a smirk. Could be worse. His second-in-command, Captain Adrienne Kessler, strode up beside him, her gauntleted fists clenched. They're deploying spore seeders. In an hour, we'll be breathing the same poison that wiped out the Arkan system. I know. Vero turned back toward the battlefield, his mind working fast. Bring out the atmospheric incinerators. We'll burn their filth before it takes root. They'll counter. They always do. That's why we counter harder. He turned to her. Status on external defenses. All gun platforms are operational. The Leviathan-class railguns online. But we'll only get 3 shots before it overheats. Plasma shielding is holding at full power, but we both know that won't last when the big ones arrive. Vero nodded. Then we make every shot count. A sudden tremor shook the ground beneath them. In the distance, the first enemy pods slammed into the wasteland, cracking open like eggs to spill nightmarish creatures onto the battlefield. The Zeltheris ground forces were a grotesque fusion of bone, muscle, and bioweaponry. 6-limbed abominations with bladed forearms and multi-jointed legs that allowed them to scuttle across the terrain like insects. Their mouths were vertical slits, lined with twitching mandibles, and their eyeless heads turned toward the fortress as if they could already smell the blood within. Vero's radio crackled. Enemy ground units advancing. He nodded, his pulse steady. Light 'em up. The Bastion roared to life. Railguns thundered. Plasma turrets shrieked. The sky ignited as the first wave of Zeltheris warriors charged. The storm had begun. The sky turned to fire. From the Bastion's walls, railguns spat hypervelocity slugs that ripped through the Zeltheris ranks, sending chunks of carapace and bioflesh spraying across the battlefield. Plasma cannons discharged streams of searing energy, reducing entire swarms to bubbling pools of liquefied matter. But the Zeltheris never hesitated. They didn't break, didn't flee. They just kept coming. From the watchtower, Commander Elias Vero tracked the battlefield through his HUD. The wasteland outside the fortress had become a churning mass of motion. Thousands of alien creatures scuttling forward on razor-sharp limbs, their bioorganic weapons pulsing with a sickly bioluminescent glow. Behind them, enormous behemoths, the size of siege tanks, trudged forward, their armor thick enough to shrug off railgun fire. The Bastion had fought off invasions before, but this was different. This was a swarm with no end. RGOS, Combat Analysis. Vero barked. The AI's response was instantaneous. First enemy wave consists of 74,000 combat organisms, including heavy-class Titan crawlers and artillery-grade bioforms. Current defensive output will neutralize approximately 20% before breach probability reaches critical. Vero clenched his jaw. That wasn't good enough. Captain Kessler, he snapped over the comms. Her voice came in, steady but urgent. Holding the western wall, sir, but they're adapting. Some of the big ones are excreting a hardened resin. It's absorbing impact from our kinetic rounds. Of course, they were mutating already. The Exceltherus learned fast. Every battle was an evolution in real time. If humanity wanted to win, they had to think faster. Switch all Western turrets to incendiary rounds, Vero ordered. If we can't break them, we burn them. A moment later, the Bastion's artillery adjusted its strategy. Instead of kinetic slugs, the turrets now hurled incendiary shells packed with thermite charges. The explosions splashed white-hot fire across the battlefield, clinging to alien flesh like napalm. The first Titan crawlers to be hit shrieked, a high-pitched, unnatural wail, before collapsing into writhing, smoldering heaps. The swarm hesitated for the first time. Kessler's voice crackled in. That's working. Bastards don't like fire. They never do. But as soon as Vero allowed himself the thought of progress, a new horror emerged. The ground near the Bastion's outer walls trembled, then erupted. Burrowing creatures the size of dropships tore out of the earth, their bodies covered in writhing tendrils that secreted corrosive acid. In seconds, they began spitting streams of the substance at the walls, and wherever it touched, metal screamed as it melted away. A warning flashed on Vero's HUD. Structural breach imminent. Damn it. They were digging under the fortress. The Bastion's walls could withstand orbital bombardment, but not an attack from beneath. The Exceltherus had found a weakness. Kessler, new problem. Vero called. Tunnelers, I want strike teams in the lower levels now. Seal every breach before they get inside. I'm on it, she responded, already moving. But even as she mobilized, a massive impact shook the entire fortress. A new contact appeared on the sensors. Something enormous was descending from the sky, and it was aiming right for them. The sky cracked open. A Exceltherus warform, easily the size of a dreadnought, descended from the clouds, its grotesque, pulsating body wrapped in layers of organic plating. A dozen biocannons lined its massive frame, each one glowing with sickly green energy. Then, with a deafening howl, it unleashed its payload. Plasma-infused acid rained down. Entire sections of Iron Bastion's outer defenses melted in an instant, the reinforced adamantite turning into slag. Railgun turrets overheated and exploded. A direct hit to the eastern wall sent shockwaves rippling through the fortress, toppling structures and throwing soldiers off their feet. The entire Bastion groaned under the force of the assault, but it did not fall. Commander Elias Vero slammed against the watchtower railing as the impact nearly took him off his feet. His HUD flickered with alerts, damage reports, casualty numbers, breach warnings. The fortress was holding, but barely. If that warform wasn't taken down, it wouldn't be holding for much longer. Argios, target analysis. Vero barked. The AI responded instantly. Dreadnought-class bioform. Estimated mass, 300,000 metric tons. Primary weaknesses. Exposed nerve clusters along dorsal ridge. Secondary core located within thoracic cavity. Conventional weapons ineffective. Recommended countermeasure. High-yield ordnance. Translation. Nothing short of a tactical nuke was bringing that thing down. RGOS, deploy the Leviathan railgun. Vero ordered. Warning. Railgun operational but requires manual targeting override due to sensor disruption. Vero cursed. The railgun was humanity's trump card, a fortress-mounted weapon designed to punch through capital-class warships in a single shot. But the Exceltherus knew it. Their interference fields were scrambling the targeting systems. That meant someone had to guide the shot manually. Kessler's voice crackled in. "Vero, I can take the shot." He clenched his jaw. The targeting controls were in an exposed tower, already damaged from the bombardment. A death trap. But there wasn't another option. "Go," he said. "Make it count." As Kessler sprinted toward the Leviathan railgun's control station, Vero turned his attention to the walls. The tunnelers had breached the lower levels, and the Xeltharis warriors were pouring in like a flood of nightmares. He patched into the squad leader's comms. "All fire teams, fall back to the inner defense lines. Heavy weapons squads, focus on the tunnel entrances. Collapse them if you have to. We hold this ground or we die on it." Below, in the Bastion's lower halls, soldiers fought in brutal close quarters. Combat knives met chitinous exoskeletons. Flamethrowers bathed the corridors in liquid fire, and grenade explosions turned entire sections of the tunnels into charnel houses. But the Xeltharis didn't stop. They climbed over their dead, their claws rending through armor, their bioplasma searing flesh. The fortress was bleeding. Then, over the comms, Kessler's voice. "Target locked." Vero didn't hesitate. "Fire." The Leviathan railgun screamed to life. A tungsten slug, the size of a dropship and moving at a fraction of light speed, tore through the sky. The impact was cataclysmic. The warform above them barely had time to react before the round obliterated its core. A shockwave of fire and bone fragments erupted in the sky as the monstrous creature split apart, its remains crashing to the ground like a meteor shower. The battlefield went silent for a fraction of a second. Then the Xeltharis let out an enraged, collective shriek. Vero tightened his grip on his rifle. The storm wasn't over. It was only getting worse. The warform's shattered remains still smoldered, massive chunks of bioflesh raining across the battlefield, but there was no time to celebrate. The Xeltharis didn't retreat. They didn't break. If anything, the destruction of their behemoth seemed to enrage them. The swarm accelerated, hurling itself at Iron Bastion with a suicidal ferocity that sent tremors through the very ground. Inside the fortress, Vero's earpiece crackled with overlapping reports. Tunnel breaches expanding, eastern sector collapsing. We're down to half power on the plasma shielding. One more direct hit and we're exposed. Ammo running low, requesting immediate resupply. Every report was the same. They were losing. Vero's gaze swept the carnage below. The battlefield was a writhing ocean of blackened carapace and bioorganic weaponry. Even as Iron Bastion's guns tore through thousands, there were always more. He could feel it in his gut. The next wave would break them. A standard commander would begin the evacuation protocols. But Elias Vero wasn't a standard commander. He keyed into the open command channel. "We're done waiting for them to kill us. We take the fight to them." The channel went silent. Then Kessler's voice, sharp with disbelief. "Sir, you're talking about an offensive." "You're damn right," Vero said. "We sit here, we die. We punch through. We might just live long enough to make them regret coming here." A moment of hesitation. Then, one by one, confirmations from squad leaders. They didn't just agree. They relished it. Humanity didn't cower. Humanity didn't wait to die. Humanity struck back. Vero switched to the Fortress Y comms. "All units, Operation Hellstorm begins now." The plan was reckless. Insane. But it was their only shot. A full-scale armored charge. Every functional vehicle, every combat mech, every soldier capable of fighting. Straight into the swarm. They weren't going to defend the Bastion. They were going to carve their way through the Xeltharis and detonate a Colotan-class warhead in the heart of their largest hive cluster. If the swarm had a nerve center, that was it. The fortress doors slammed open. Out poured the wrath of humanity. Steel war machines, their treads crushing bone and chitin beneath them, thundered forward. Tanks unleashed rapid-fire plasma shells, carving fiery trenches into the battlefield. Mechs the size of buildings waded through the swarm, their chain guns spitting death at thousands of rounds per second. Infantry, clad in reinforced exosuits, charged with flamethrowers, rail rifles, and plasma lances, turning the ground into a hellscape of fire and shattered flesh. The Telthuris recoiled, not in fear, but in sheer shock. They had not expected humans to attack. Vero led from the front, his power armor plated with battle scars, his heavy railgun cutting down anything that moved. Kessler fought beside him, wielding a grav hammer that shattered Telthuris warriors with every swing. The charge was chaos, pure and unrelenting, but it worked. Within minutes, they were deep inside the swarm. And the hive was within reach. The battlefield was a storm of blood and fire. Iron Bastion's war machines carved through the Telthuris like a blade through rotten flesh. Plasma rounds melted chitin. Rail slugs punched holes the size of drop pods through bioforms, and flamethrowers turned the nightmarish swarm into burning husks. The human charge had shattered the enemy's front lines, driving deep into the heart of the Telthuris forces. For the first time in history, humanity wasn't just surviving. They were winning. Then the sky split open. The ground trembled, sending cracks racing across the battlefield. A deep, resonant howl, something impossibly vast and ancient, echoed across the wasteland. Soldiers stumbled, weapons shaking in their hands. Even the Telthuris, a species that knew no fear, hesitated. A new horror was descending. From the clouds came a Leviathan. It was colossal, a living battleship, hundreds of meters long, its body covered in writhing spines and jagged plates of organic armor. Its flesh rippled with eerie, bioluminescent veins, pulsating with energy. Giant tendrils dangled from its underbelly, each one large enough to crush a tank. Its mouth, a grotesque vertical maw lined with rotating rows of teeth, unfurled, releasing a deep, unnatural screech. Argio's synthetic voice cut through the chaos. Warning: new Telthuris warform detected. Estimated mass: 700,000 metric tons. Classification: Titan-class dreadnought. Vero stared at the monstrosity. His grip on his railgun tightened. The Telthuris had just raised the stakes. The Titan landed like a meteor, sending out a shockwave that sent both human and Telthuris forces flying. Its massive limbs dug into the ground, stabilizing its grotesque bulk. Then it fired. From its chest, a beam of raw energy exploded outward, a superheated plasma lance powerful enough to turn a city into molten glass. It gutted an entire battalion in a second, disintegrating tanks, mechs, and infantry alike. The blast tore a crater into the battlefield, sending debris and bodies spiraling into the sky. Silence, then screaming, then chaos. Vero forced himself to his feet, his visor flashing with casualty reports. Hundreds dead in an instant. They were exposed, out in the open, with no cover. And that thing was about to fire again. Kessler's voice crackled through the comms, breathless. "Commander, we can't fight that thing in the open. We need tow. We are fighting it." Vero's voice was steel. "Argios, can the Leviathan railgun take it down?" "Negative. Titan-class warform possesses redundant cores and reinforced bioarmor. Conventional firepower insufficient. Then we go inside it." Kessler hesitated. "You want to do what?" "We get a team inside that thing and take out its core from within." There was no other way. The Titan's armor was too thick, its regeneration too fast. They had one option: infiltration. Vero slammed a fresh power pack into his railgun. His voice was calm, but burning with determination. "All units, fall back to Bastion defensive lines. I'm taking a strike team into the Titan." The storm wasn't over. It was just beginning. The Titan let out another screech, a sound so deep it rattled bones, and sent dust cascading from the shattered remnants of Iron Bastion. Its bioplasma cannon fired again, carving a molten trench through the battlefield, vaporizing an entire armored division in an instant. Vero didn't flinch. He didn't have time to. Strike Team Epsilon, on me. We're boarding that thing. The plan was suicide. Every soldier knew it. Not a single one hesitated. This was humanity. The Titan's hide was impenetrable to orbital strikes and artillery, but it had one weakness: the gaping wounds left behind by the Leviathan railgun. Huge chunks of its bio-armor had been blown away, leaving raw, pulsating flesh exposed. That was their way in. The team sprinted through the hellscape of no man's land. Fire, smoke, and Seltherus corpses littering the path. Kessler led the charge, her gravhammer crushing any remaining Seltherus warriors foolish enough to stand in their way. Gunships roared overhead, covering their advance. The Bastion's surviving artillery fired nonstop, pounding the Titan's outer defenses, trying to keep it distracted. It wasn't enough. The Titan's massive tendrils lashed out, smashing through the battlefield like an apocalyptic storm. One of them struck a gunship mid-flight, sending it spiraling into the dirt in a massive fireball. Another tendril ripped through a mech, crushing it like paper. Varro's HUD flashed incoming. A tendril swept toward him. He barely dodged, rolling across the dirt as the ground exploded where he had stood. The shockwave sent him tumbling, but he was back on his feet in an instant. "Move-y," he roared. They reached the Titan's wound, a gaping hole in its side, oozing black ichor. It was a cavern of flesh, the exposed muscle twitching like something aware of its own mutilation. The opening was closing, regenerating. If they didn't go now, they'd never get in. Kessler didn't wait for orders. She activated her exosuit's thrusters and jumped, landing inside the wound with a sickening squelch. The rest of the team followed, one after another, diving straight into the abyss. Varro was the last. As he leaped inside, the wound sealed shut behind him. They were trapped. Inside, the Titan's body was a nightmare. Walls of writhing flesh pulsed with alien bioluminescence. Veins the size of highways ran along the cavernous passageways, carrying thick, glowing fluid through the creature's body. The air was humid, putrid, filled with the scent of decay and raw organic matter. The walls moved, contracting in slow, rhythmic waves. The thing was breathing. "Jesus," one of the soldiers muttered. "This is worse than the time we had to clear a hive nest on Varkos 9. "Shut it," Kessler snapped. "Stay focused." Varro adjusted his rifle. "Argioas, give me a path to the core." The AI's voice crackled in his ear. "Core located in central thoracic cavity. Estimated distance, 1 kilometer. Hostile biodefenses detected. Expect resistance." Varro exhaled. Of course, there would be resistance. Then let's get to work. The team advanced deeper. The Titan knew they were inside it, and it was about to fight back. The Titan reacted. The walls of pulsing flesh shuddered, veins swelling as the creature's immune response kicked in. The air grew thick with the stench of bile as the corridors began to shift, sealing off pathways, twisting into new formations. The Titan was reshaping itself to trap them. Then came the horrors. From the fleshy walls, biodefenders emerged. Humanoid only in shape, they were grotesque abominations. Dripping with mucus, their elongated limbs ending in serrated bone blades. Their eyeless faces split open, revealing rows of needled teeth. And then they charge. "Q on take," Kessler shouted. The cavern erupted in gunfire. Varro's rifle kicked in his hands as he unloaded a rail burst into the nearest creature. The high-velocity slugs punched through its torso, spraying black ichor against the twitching walls. But it kept coming. It took 4 more rounds before the thing finally collapsed, its body convulsing. Flamethrowers roared to life. Walls and monsters alike were set ablaze. The stench of burning flesh was unbearable, but the Seltherus immune guardians didn't scream, didn't falter. They fought like the Titan itself, relentless. The creatures ripped through the strike team, their bladed arms slashing through armor. A soldier was impaled, screaming as the bioform pulled him apart. Another went down under a pile of them, his rifle vanishing beneath a mass of gnashing teeth and tearing claws. "Keep moving," Vero barked, firing another round straight into the skull of a lunging creature. The team pushed forward, cutting down the swarm with bullets, fire, and sheer human determination. They reached a narrow passage, their only path to the Titan's core. But as they sprinted toward it, the walls convulsed violently. The entire tunnel tilted. A pulse rippled through the flesh, and suddenly the floor collapsed beneath them. Vero felt himself fall. The team plunged into darkness, sliding down a chute of slick, undulating muscle. They tumbled, twisting as the Titan's body swallowed them whole. Then, impact. They landed hard, their armor absorbing the worst of it, but the moment they hit the ground, something moved. A deep rumble. Then, from the shadows, it emerged. The core guardian. It was massive, easily 5 meters tall, a nightmarish fusion of sulfurous biology and living fortress. Its entire body was armored in bone plating, its arms fused into 2 colossal scythe-like appendages, and its chest cavity pulsed with a bioluminescent glow, the core node of the Titan itself. If they wanted to kill this beast, this was the final wall standing in their way. Vero pulled himself up, eyes locking onto the monstrosity. He could feel the Titan's heartbeat pulsing through the ground beneath them, synchronized with the creature's chest. Destroy this thing, and the Titan dies with it. Vero cracked his neck. His railgun whined as it powered up. "All right, ugly," he muttered. "Let's end this." The core guardian let out a deafening roar, a sound that vibrated through the Titan's living corridors like a war drum. Its bioluminescent core flared, energy building in pulses of unnatural light. Then, with terrifying speed, it lunged. Vero barely had time to react before a scythe the size of a car slammed into the ground where he'd stood a second ago. The impact cracked the fleshy floor, sending tremors through the chamber. The thing was fast, too fast for something so big. "Focus fire on the core," he shouted. The team unleashed hell. Rail slugs, plasma rounds, and incendiary charges tore into the beast's armor. The cavern flashed with every impact, but the Guardian didn't slow down. It twisted, bringing its second scythe in a brutal sweeping arc. A soldier wasn't fast enough. The blade sliced through him like paper, cutting clean through his armor. His body collapsed in 2 separate pieces. The squad kept firing, but it was clear this thing wouldn't go down easily. Kessler roared and charged, Gravhammer humming with lethal energy. She dodged under a strike, rolled, and brought the hammer up in a devastating arc. The shockwave ripped through the creature's knee joint, shattering bone, and sending the Guardian staggering back. It was their chance. Now, Vero roared. He raised his railgun and fired directly into the glowing core. The shot hit home. The Guardian screeched, its entire body convulsing. The core fractured, black ichor spraying outward. But the bastard wasn't dead yet. In one final act of vengeance, the creature threw itself at them, scythes wide, ready to drag them all to hell. Kessler didn't hesitate. She launched forward, planting her feet and swinging her Gravhammer with everything she had. The hammer connected with the fractured core, and the impact was cataclysmic. The core shattered. A chain reaction erupted inside the Guardian, bioplasma and volatile energy detonating all at once. The creature collapsed in on itself, screeching as its body burned from the inside out. Then the Titan itself began to die. The walls seized and spasmed, the ground shook violently, and the heartbeat faltered. Vero switched to comms. "Arjos, detonation status." The AI's voice crackled back. "Warhead primed. Estimated 30 seconds until full Titan collapse." Not long enough. Move, move, move. The team sprinted for an exit, following their HUDs to a weakening section of the Titan's body. The dying creature's immune system was collapsing, its flesh softening, liquefying. Vero detonated a breaching charge. The explosion ripped open an escape route. The team dived through, landing outside just as the Titan exploded. A shockwave of fire, bone, and ichor tore through the battlefield, incinerating everything in a 5-kilometer radius. The Seltherus forces screamed in unison, their swarm mind feeling the death of their god-beast. Then, silence. The battlefield was still. The Exceltherus were breaking. Kessler coughed, pulling herself to her feet. She looked at Vero, breathing hard. That was insane. Vero stared at the burning remains of the Titan. The iron bastion still stood. Humanity had won.